Greater Toronto and Hamilton area needs new transportation infrastructure. More than a dozen plans have looked at tackling the problem, and representatives from two of those plans are here now to tell us what they see as possible solutions to the gridlock GTHA. So joining us now in studio, Carol Wilding. She's president and CEO of the Toronto Region Board of Trade, and Bruce McCuaig. He's president and CEO of Metrolinx. We also want to let you know that producers Mark Brosens and Naveen Vaswani are hosting a Twitter chat right now on this topic, so send us your thoughts on getting the GTHA moving again. Use the hashtag AgendaTVO. And welcome to you two, back to our studio. Return visits for both of you. Bruce, I want to start with you, and I don't want to operate under the assumption, as mentioned, because there have been so many plans out there, that anybody knows what's actually the finished product that's on the table that's under consideration right now. So, you guys released the big move about 5 years ago. What are you proposing?
So it's a 25-year, $50 billion plan, and it's all about providing more choices across the region. It's tripling the amount of rapid transit, it's doubling our transit modal share, and we've already started. We've got about $16 billion worth of projects, everything from the Spadina subway extension to light rail transit. And what we're now talking about is the next wave. How do we keep building more and more transit and transportation infrastructure, because we're growing by 100,000 people every year in this region? You
are $16 billion into a $50 billion plan. Can you get to where you want to go under the status quo?
Well, that's really what the investment strategy is all about. And the legislation sets out that we have to provide a report to the province and municipalities no later than June the 1st. And it's to set out the kinds of tools that we think are the right tools to continue to invest in transit and transportation. It's basically putting us in the same playing field as places like Vancouver, Montreal, and Chicago, and London, where they have investment tools that are dedicated and they provide a sustained investment into the system.
Is an investment tool the same thing as a tax?
Well, it depends what the tool is. A lot of them are tax tools, things like a sales tax, for example, in Los Angeles, or in some cases in New York or Paris, they have an employer payroll tax. There's also tolls and a congestion charge in London. So there's a whole variety of different tools that have been used all around the world.
Okay, let's, if I can control them, let's bring the graphic up of the GTHA and take a look at the map of the area of which we're discussing. And then I'm going to get Carol to tell us why you think this area of the province, which is what, about 5 million people? Is it as much as 5 million?
Up to 6, between 5 and 6 million.
Okay, yes. So it's almost half the province living in that little red area. Mm-hmm. Why do we need to implement the big move?
You know, simply put, it's costing our regional economy in the GTHA area $6 billion a year. That's on an annual basis. Lost jobs, lost investment, lost productivity. So we are losing that on an annual basis, projected to rise to $15 billion by 2031. So it may cost us $2 billion a year right now to build out what Bruce has described in terms of a 25-year plan, $50 billion. But the cost of not doing it is multiples of that. So we've got to get on with it. We all know our own personal and professional experiences around it. It's critical. It's reached a crisis level.
Can you just put a little more flesh on that bone? How is it that because we can't get from A to B in a timely fashion, it ends up costing the economy billions?
Well, you take a workforce from a talent perspective, just trying to attract people into the Toronto region. And when we talk to the businesses from a Board of Trade perspective, they're telling us they're having problems in terms of succession planning, in terms of talent attraction, because people don't want to come into the city. They don't even want to commute 10 blocks, let alone across, different municipal lines to come from Mississauga into Toronto, or to come north from Aurora, Newmarket, or Markham down into the city, because it takes hours. What used to take potentially 30 or 40 minutes now takes 60, 70, 80 minutes. We have the longest commute times. The board measured that in 2011. Longest commute times compared to LA. So we're losing talent. We're losing, wealth creation in terms of GDP. It's a critical issue.
Let me follow up on that. Is it really true that you've talked to executives from other cities in North America who have said, I'm not moving to Toronto.
Yes.
The job may be fantastic, but the traffic's too bad? Seriously?
Yes. I've talked to executives in senior large corporations who have talked about the challenge they have within the GTHA in terms of trying to move senior individuals from one part of the region into another part of the region, because people just simply don't want to have that kind of disruption to themselves and to their whole family unit, because we're not talking about individuals, we're talking about families as well. That is the significance of this issue. And we've had other businesses, when they look to come in and locate, if they're looking to come into Toronto or the Toronto region, there's a whole host of factors. But gridlock is now very much at the top of that list, or certainly within the top 3 in terms of why a business will choose not to actually locate.
Okay, you heard Bruce's view that in order to move from a $16 billion expenditure so far to a $50 billion expenditure,
yes,
we can't have the status quo. You have to have new, quote unquote, investment tools to get us there.
Yes.
Do you agree with that observation?
Yes, absolutely. I think if we, Steve, if we could have afforded to do it, if we thought there was the fiscal capacity, provincially, municipally, potentially with federal investment, then I think we would have done it by now. I'd like to think, given the size of the quantum of the problem that I've described at $6 billion. But we know that any dollars that would be found there, whether it's through efficiencies or finding waste, we're competing against deficits and getting deficits paid down. We've got debt levels that we have to get rid of. We've got healthcare. We've got education. So when it comes to infrastructure at the bottom of that list, there's a lot of competition there for those infrastructure dollars. And we've seen that it hasn't happened for the last 2+ decades. We need dedicated revenue tools.
I'm going to go at Bruce on this one more time, because you were, before you got this job, you were a deputy minister in the Ontario government.
That's right.
So you know how the money gets shoveled from portfolio to portfolio. Is it really the case that with all of the competition for the public dollar right now, you really couldn't do this plan unless you got new revenue streams?
Well, I think the bottom line is that over the past 20, 30 years, we haven't been investing in these areas. So why would we think, especially in an era where budgets of all levels of government are constrained because of the fiscal challenges we're facing, that the same way that we've attempted to do this in the past is going to work in the future. So what I think is really important is to have a dedicated and sustained year by year revenue flow, because that allows you to plan. We're talking about projects that sometimes can take 10 years to deliver. And if you're doing your fiscal planning year over year, particularly when you have 3 levels of government involved in budgetary decisions, it makes it very difficult to have a sustained program. So having a year-by-year investment going in allows an organization to build the kind of infrastructure that we need for this region.
Okay, Carol, a dedicated and sustained revenue stream looks like what?
Well, there are some 20, 25 plus revenue tools that are out there. 3 years ago, the Toronto Region Board of Trade put out some 16. At the time, that was seen as controversial. I think it shows you how far we've come, that it's not controversial now to be having this kind of a discussion. So we've gone through a consultation process that's really been, I would say, pretty much 3 years long, but certainly in the last year. And we've taken that and we've narrowed it down. We put out a set of criteria when we went out to consult with business, with academia, with government. Narrowed that criteria to say, how do we go from 16 down to some combination? Because we are going to need a combination. It isn't any one revenue tool that will get us to $2 billion. We've advanced 4. We think they need to be seriously considered.
Go ahead. What are they?
They're a regional sales tax, a regional fuel tax, a parking levy, and a hot lane. And so in combination, those will actually get you well over $2 billion a year.
If you did all of those things,
yes,
you'd get $2 billion a year.
You'd get over $2 billion a year.
More than $2 billion. And that's what you're aiming for right now.
And what we need right now is $2 billion a year in terms of building out the Big Move plan. That's for capital only, is the $2 billion. We're not talking operating at this point.
Why is, municipalities usually, when they want to build new things, kick up the property tax a little bit to help pay for them? That's not on your list. How come?
No. Property tax is the main source of revenue for municipalities, and it has to serve a whole host. It has to do a lot of heavy lifting at a municipal level. You've got schools and water and, a whole bunch of other state of good repair. So it just can't be expected, if they're barely keeping up at a municipal level right now, to be able to finance capital. Property tax just can't do it. It's just too much.
Do you have a view at Metrolinx as to which of these potential tools ought to be brought in or not?
Well, we released last week a short list of 11 tools. So they included all the 4 tools that Carol just went through, but it has a longer range of tools. And we're asking the public and municipalities and stakeholders to provide us with feedback. We're moving towards having our recommendation to our board on May the 27th. So this is all about getting the input and trying to refine our recommendation to whatever that package is going to be at that point in time.
Is there anything right now that's a complete non-starter for you?
Well, we want to look at those 11 tools. We have heard from municipalities, we've heard from the public, we've actually heard from the Premier as well that support for property tax, as Carol indicated, is not something that a lot of people believe is the right tool. So
that's a non-starter.
That's something that we're taking as a very strong position, because, and she's right, that it has to fund a lot of infrastructure, a lot of services right now, and it's a relatively stable, it doesn't grow that quickly, source of revenue, and people, of course, it goes back to their household and their business incomes.
Okay, she's at 4 tools, you're at 11. So what else is on give us just a few of the ones that are on your list that are not on her list.
So we had a series of larger tools, because with $2 billion a year, you do need to have large revenue generation. So that would include everything from a sales tax approach to highway tolls would be another example, an employer payroll tax. So those are some of the things in the large tool package. On the smaller tool, there's some tools that we think are important, not because they raise a lot of revenue, but because they send a really strong policy message. Land value capture. How can you link the development that's occurring around transit stations, for example, and the value uplift you get to get a contribution towards that infrastructure? Another one is high occupancy toll lanes. And can we convert the high occupancy vehicle lanes that we currently have on the system and allow people with only one person in the car to pay a toll to access it? So they have to pay a premium, but they don't have to choose. They have the choice of staying in the other lanes of traffic that they want.
So just so I get this, you're on the Don Valley Parkway, you're going nowhere, as is almost always the case, and you see the, whatever you want to call it, HOV lane on the left there. If you want, under this new system, you can move into that lane, which tends to move faster, but you'd have to pay for it.
That's the idea.
That's the idea.
Yes.
Any idea how much you could raise by doing that?
Well, it's a smaller tool. It's probably in the range of about $25 million a year. So it's important not for the revenue it raises, but by giving people choice and by getting, I guess, a better optimization of the system.
Okay. Are your 11 proposals a kind of a seamless web? It's all or nothing?
No, it's actually, these are 11 ideas. I don't think we're going to be coming out on May the 27th with a package of 11 tools. We're choosing from these. We started with a list of about 26. Okay. We went through a process with the public, and we went through some review of principles, of dedication, of fairness in terms of who pays and who benefits, equity across the region, accountability and transparency. And we came down to those 11. We're now going through another review process, and we hope to come out with what in the end is our recommendation to the province and municipalities.
Okay. Carol, if we remember that map that we put up earlier, yes. Certainly we know there's lots of traffic on the Gardiner Expressway, the Queen Elizabeth Way, 427, the Don Valley Parkway, the 401, etc. And there may be some, well, we've seen public opinion polling which suggests there is some appetite to engage in these fees, tolls, tools, whatever you want to call them, in order to alleviate that congestion. But if you lived in, let's say, Georgina, right up near where Lake Simcoe is, how much appetite do you think there is? And I know you're the Toronto Region Board of Trade, so you can comment on this. How much appetite do you think there is to pay more for services that will overwhelmingly probably help other people and not you?
Well, go back to, you look at that map. It's a regional problem. It needs a regional solution, which is the big move. It needs regional dedicated revenue tools, and we function as a single regional economic unit. Not to say that within that region there aren't, again, individual, pockets or areas where economies may be a little more self-contained, where communities are self-contained, but people travel, through and around the region. We know that 350,000 people on a daily basis are traveling across the region and into Toronto. So we've got to take that bigger picture look rather than a parochial view that says, I only want to pay a certain amount of a revenue tool that's relative to the area that I may reside in, because people move across those borders and across those boundaries. And those aren't always easy conversations, because some people will say, I don't travel in with the same frequency. Right. And that goes back to the principle that in looking at our revenue tools about equity and fairness. So everybody needs to participate. Everybody will benefit. We all need to do our fair share. It doesn't mean willingly we put our hand up and say, reach into my pocket, but I know that I'm going to benefit. So if I'm living there and I choose to come into the city for some particular reason, whether it's family related or culture related, then I will benefit. And that may be different than somebody who lives in a neighboring municipality who does a daily commute back and forth for work. So, we have to look at it in that larger context. And in the consultations that we've had with businesses and with individuals, by and large, people understand that. I think the public is actually quite sophisticated on this issue, and I would have to say I think are ahead of the politicians.
Well, that's my next and last question for you, Bruce, in our last 30 seconds here. At the end of the day, someone has to decide what to go ahead with. Who's that person?
Well, it's got to have to be the politicians. We are the
Which
advisors.
ones? Is it the province?
It's
Is
the
it the
province.
municipality?
We report to the province and municipalities. We could be putting forward a package that includes both provincial tools as well as some tools that are in the municipal realm. So there has to be a discussion afterwards. And I think it has to be, though, a regional choice. We can't have a municipality by municipality choice. We have to come up with a regional solution.
Gotcha. That's Bruce McCuaig, President CEO of Metrolinx, and Carol Wilding, President CEO of the Toronto Region Board of Trade. Good of you to come into TVO today and help us out with this discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.